everyone. Welcome to the morning show. We're coming to you today on WJOP-LP Newburyport at FM 96.3 on Channel 9 and on Newburyport Community Media's YouTube station at ncmhub.org. I'm your host, Mary Jacobsen, and this morning I'm delighted to welcome Brette Steele here. Brette is the Senior Director for Preventing Targeted Violence at the McCain Institute at Arizona State University. She's also the founder of the Prevention Practitioners Network, which she's here to talk to us about today. In fact, Brette, welcome, and I hope you could start us off by telling us about what the Prevention Practitioners Network is, the kind of work you do, why you decided it was important to found it, and what's its relationship with the McCain Institute.
Yes, thank you, Mary. The Prevention Practitioners Network is a national network of interdisciplinary professionals dedicated to preventing targeted violence, terrorism, and their impacts across the United States. We have over 1,200 practitioners, be they social workers, psychologists, nonprofit organizations that provide wraparound services, local leaders, and everyone in between who has a role to play in early prevention of targeted violence as part of the network. I decided to create the Prevention Practitioners Network when I was in my role at the Department of Justice. At the Department of Justice, I actually coordinated what was then terrorism prevention across the whole department. And I would get calls regularly from prosecutors or FBI agents or even judges saying, you've got this child. Often they may have some type of disability or some other mitigating circumstances. They're not even 18, but they're sharing propaganda on behalf of ISIS, or they're planning to travel to Syria to fight on behalf of ISIS. And nearly always the message was, I can't charge this kid, or I'm not sure that 20 years in prison is the right answer for this kid. Give me other options. And at the same time, I had nonprofits coming to me from around the country saying, we want to be part of the solution. We're going to be the first organization to do X. And I would tell them, that's fantastic, but there are 4 other organizations already doing X. Can I introduce you to them?
Yeah.
And that way you don't have to recreate the wheel. And so the Prevention Practitioners Network exists to connect those interdisciplinary professionals with one another, to share promising practices and the latest research, and to have a national directory of all of the resources and clinically licensed providers. So no matter where you are in that country or who you are, if you're a prosecutor looking for an alternative to prosecution, or if you're a parent looking for a resource for your child, you have one directory to go to find resources in your region.
What a great idea. I mean, it seems, Brette, as though, the sad part is that the need is so great that many people all over the country in many different types of institutions were struggling to find resources and starting to generate ideas about what they could do. But it's certainly, what's the expression, a force multiplier, to have a central clearinghouse where all these different organizations can create a network and share ideas and resources. And rather than duplicate efforts, they can generate more effective and creative responses in a timely way. So it just seems like a brilliant idea. The sad part is that we need it so badly, and the need doesn't seem to go away. But one of the reasons I was really glad to talk to you and to learn more about the network is that it can be easy these days to start feeling a little despairing and confused about what can we do? What can I do? How can I have an impact? How can I make things better? And I think that knowing about the presence of your network is home plate, for people. It's a starting place, learning about the organizations, that they exist, that they're out there, that there are a lot of people who are working very hard to figure out creative ways to improve our situation, to create a safer, saner world for all of us. I mean, I'm touched by the situation you gave. I know one of the organizations that is one of your members that I, through Dave Fortier's One World, I had the opportunity to interview Miriam Churchill of Parents for Peace. And so, thank you for having the idea to start this network. It sounds just really terrific. And what is the connection between your organization? Tell us a little bit about the overarching home of the McCain Institute.
Yes, so the McCain Institute is an institute inspired by the legacy of Senator John McCain and his family to make the world more free, safe, and just.
Yeah.
And so our programs range from democracy and human rights to character-driven leadership, preventing targeted violence, the program I lead, as well as combating human trafficking.
Well, what a significant legacy.
Absolutely.
It couldn't be all of them so critical to creating a better world. Well, we're doing this interview, we're recording this in September, and sadly, we just had the really tragic, senseless, hate-based racist violence in Jacksonville, Florida, where a 21-year-old man with Nazi swastikas on his AR-15 murdered 3 African-American people just because of their skin color, because he had developed this hate and he was able to get the weapons. So how do we go about then, Brette, preventing this kind of hate-based violence like what we just saw in Jacksonville, Florida?
So the Prevention Practitioners Network takes a public health approach to preventing targeted violence. And this is a model that was designed by the Centers for Disease Control. It's an evidence-based model. It's been used for multiple different forms of violence. And it starts at the grassroots level. Everyone has a role to play in a public health approach to violence prevention. So you start with public awareness. What does everyone need to know to understand how hate-fueled violence starts? How does it start? How does it develop? When do you need to know when you need to have a conversation with someone and get them the support they need, as well as when you need to know, okay, they're at risk of actually committing an act of violence, and I now need to call law enforcement. Because those are 2 different types of interventions that happen along that trajectory. So you start with that public awareness. From there, you can also build youth resilience. So just as all of us have risk factors for different types of negative outcomes, we also have something called protective factors, things that make us less likely to commit an act of violence. And so very early on, we can work with youth, all youth, to enhance their protective factors that may make them less susceptible to some of these violent narratives they're exposed to online. From there, you've got your public awareness, you've got your youth resilience. Now, what does the public need to do if they're concerned about someone?
Yeah.
They need to know what they're seeing, be able to recognize it. They need to know where to go when they recognize it, who to go to for help. Because someone just yesterday told me, I work in this field and I don't know who to call when X happens, right? So when to call to get someone help, who to call to get someone help, and those interventions that provide those wraparound services. So this approach looks a lot like gang prevention, insofar as a lot of the models for gang prevention look not just at potential criminal conduct, but what are the social needs of the individual? What are the psychological needs of the individual? And how do we get them all of the support they need to pick a different path? Whether that's connecting youth with a caring adult who can mentor them, whether that's more positive social outlets because they're searching for that sense of belonging and searching for that sense of identity. And we need to intervene early and get them into more positive outcomes. Or maybe they've already decided that violence is justified and they need to work with an intervention program to analyze that thinking and work to disengage from that violent content and violent rhetoric. That's what intervention looks like. And then if people do commit acts of violence, what are we doing with them afterwards to disengage them from that violence so they don't go on to commit future acts? It's a whole spectrum, and everyone has a role to play at different steps in that spectrum.
So what's interesting about what you're describing is that it's very much a multi-pronged approach and kind of a pyramid approach too. I mean, the baseline of that, it makes me think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The baseline is to understand what you're looking for, because the best outcome is to be able to predict what some of the risk factors are. Just as you would with certain kinds of physical illnesses, or as you said, with the temptation to join a gang. And so for people that you can see might be drifting in a certain direction, there are certain kinds of interventions that you would apply at that point. And then at another level, there are people who are already online. They're reading all of the, the hateful propaganda online. And something else is called for to intervene there. And a lot of that means, if I'm understanding you, people need to know what the signs are, that it's not just a lonely young person who needs a community, but this is and I say lonely because Vivek Murthy, our Surgeon General, has talked about loneliness being an epidemic for us. And certainly, I assume one of the protective factors is a healthy community of people to turn to who will kind of ground you in a more constructive, creative outlets for who you are, and also constructive responses to what your needs are, things that will actually help you feel less lonely. And so those people need different kinds of resources. With the key being adults and others around them, teachers, family members, knowing these are the things I need to look out for when I see them. And then, of course, they need another thing that you provide, which is, who do I call? What do I do? How do I intervene? And then at another level, you have people who have already entered the world of hate and violence, and they need to somehow there's kind of grounded in sanity and mental health once again.
And it's not always mental health, but it is disengagement from violence.
Yeah, okay.
So the director of the DHS Center for Prevention Programs and Partners talks about this in terms of mental wellness rather than mental health. It's not always a mental illness. However, all of us can benefit from greater mental wellness.
Yes.
Self-care and identifying the resources we need to feel that sense of community connectedness, which, as you said, is primary protective factor for so many different forms of violence, not just hate-filled violence.
So how do people gain access then to the resources that you have? Like if you have somebody, for example, the person who is seeing signs, or they think they're seeing signs, and they're not quite sure, but they're worried. And they think, this looks problematic to me. How do they enter into the network that you've developed so that they can gain access to somebody who can help them make the assessment, somebody can hook them up with the services that are appropriately designed to help them intervene at whatever stage the person they're concerned about is?
Great question. The first thing I will say to people who are looking for resources is trust your gut. Trust your gut. If you think that someone may need additional support, the whole point of the Prevention Practitioners Network is to encourage people to seek help. It doesn't have to be reporting to law enforcement or nothing at all. You can seek help far earlier and have a much greater chance of having positive outcomes the earlier you seek help. So if you think you need something, trust your gut. We have our Screen Hate campaign. The URL is screenhate.org, O-R-G. And this is a campaign specifically tailored to parents and concerned adults. And it has 4 steps. The first, prepare. Understand where youth and adults, frankly, are exposed to hate-fueled violence online. The different ways, it's not a question of if they will come across hate-fueled violence, but when and how often. And what steps you can take to reduce that. Then talk. In talk, we have a series of conversation guides and conversation starters for parents and other concerned adults to open lines of communication and talk about when you start claiming that the Holocaust never happened. Or that Helen Keller wasn't a real person. You know, all of these types of misinformation that we see out there, conversation starters to start that conversation. Then we have prevent. Research has shown that when people are concerned about someone they love and the potential risk of violence, they really want to understand what's happening before they feel comfortable reaching out for help. And so our prevent page has very clean, frequently asked questions guide to help parents and concerned adults know, understand what they're seeing, understand what may be happening, what types of resources are out there, and then finally seek help. And that connects anyone in the public, parent, concerned adult, peer, to the National Directory for the Prevention Practitioners Network. That directory is organized by type of resource. So if you want a youth resilience program, because you just want youth to be better supported in their school, there are youth resilience programs. If you want digital literacy, because you're hearing youth share a lot of conspiracy theories, there are those. Or if you want referral lines or bystander training so that your synagogue can be better prepared. Or you mentioned the shooting that happened in Florida just before this recording. You know, there a student flagged a concern to campus security, and campus security approached the individual, at which point the individual actually left campus. Unfortunately, he went on to commit a deadly attack at a grocery store nearby, but recognizing that the power of that individual in seeing that something didn't look right, trusting their gut, and seeking help. And so all of those resources, the other resources available in the National Directory for the Prevention Practitioners Network are clinically licensed professionals. So if you've gotten a threat assessment and this individual really does need long-term supportive services, there are intervention teams, but there are also clinically licensed psychologists, social workers, psychiatrists, all of which have raised their hand and said, I am willing to accept these referrals. I want to help youth in need. Because one of the things we found over time is that not all psychologists are willing to accept a referral if a person holds neo-Nazi beliefs, for example.
Yes.
They may be concerned for their own safety. They maybe feel out of their depth in how to approach that. And so the directory provides a list of individuals with experience and appropriate licensing who have raised their hand and said, yes, I want to take these cases. Please reach out if you need help.
Yeah. Well, you know, Brette, the powerful message, overarching message I take from what you're saying is that you are not alone with your concern or your worry or your fear. You are not alone. You need not be alone, because there is a directory of resources that you have access to online. And no matter what it is, because it's clearly very comprehensive, you'll be able to find somebody there that you can call up or reach out to. And if they're not the appropriate person, then they can refer you to somebody who is, because it's a big directory. And I think that feeling of not being alone has to be very, very reassuring for people. You don't have to invent you know, an intervention. There are people who have been there, who have studied the problem, and who, like the core of psychologists, for example, there are people there who are willing and able to tackle some of the most difficult kinds of challenges, you know, that would confront somebody trying to undo conspiracy theories or various kinds of hatred, to sit in an office with somebody. And so they're there. And so not being alone, I think, is the kind of thing that gives people hope and strength. And resolve. And those are all important factors, I think, in us feeling as though we have the power to make our world kind of place that's safe for all of us to inhabit and thrive in. And that's the goal. So it just sounds like, you know, a very well-designed, very comprehensive, very knowledge-based and evidence-based approach that you're talking about. I'm curious to find out, Brette, how do you know if the prevention programs that you're talking about are working, that they're being effective, that they're achieving their goals?
This is something that Congress asked us weekly for years. And so it's something we've spent a lot of time thinking about. And that's part of why we use the public health approach, is because it is so evidence-driven and evidence-informed. So at every stage of the intervention, you can see, is the public actually aware? You know, you can measure pre and post test. Do they understand risk factors? Do they understand protective factors? Do they know where to go for help? But just as importantly, if not more so, are they willing to call if they see someone needs help? Because research has shown that more often than not, parents and peers, the people who really care about the individuals they may be concerned about and are most likely to have those concerns, more often than not, they don't call law enforcement because they don't want to get someone they love in trouble. And so we're trying to create a directory of resources that they can feel safe contacting. And one of the messages we found really resonated during the Screen Hate campaign was, it's completely confidential.
Oh, sure.
We don't collect any personally identifying information. We just make the directory available so that they can judge for themselves which resources may be the best fit, and only reach out to the ones that they can vet and trust for themselves. So you can measure each of those. Are you raising public awareness? Are people knowing where to go? And are they willing to go seek help? Then, when you're working with an individual, if there's an individual at risk, you're doing assessments. when they start the program and later on of their risk factors as well as their protective factors. Is their isolation? You talked about that really critical risk factor that is an epidemic across this country. Is that reduced over time?
Mm-hmm.
The inverse protective factor, social connectedness, is that increasing over time?
Mm-hmm.
So you can measure the impact on individuals across all of their different risk factors through assessments over time to see if it's working to reduce the risk for those individuals. And that's why it's so important to have evidence-based programs.
Mm-hmm.
And we're constantly at the McCain Institute, 3 of our programs are undergoing independent academic evaluation to ensure that we are learning and creating that constant feedback loop to refine programs over time to make them as effective as possible.
You know, all of those signs of effectiveness, they're all behavioral things you can observe. They're all tangible behaviors that you can observe. Are people contacting us? Are people, again, you led earlier with talking about the importance of education and awareness. And with awareness comes people, I'm sure, reaching out to you because I'm sure they're thrilled to find out you're there. And then also observable changes. Again, emphasizing are people connected? Are people part of a community? Are people linked to one another? And those are all things that you can observe. And it strikes me that just the amount of relief that people who contact you looking for help must feel, being able to interact with professionals who clearly, you know what you're doing, you know what will be helpful, you know what the outcomes are that you're looking for. And I just backing up a little bit, but I totally understand why a concerned parent or teacher would hesitate at making their first contact with an intervention be somebody in law enforcement. And I'm sure there are times when that's necessary, but no one would want to start there if you could find a better, safer, more empathic way to reach somebody who is in danger. Because I'm sure that is what most parents, teachers, peers as well, are concerned about, the danger that someone is setting themselves up for, of making mistakes out of misconceptions and misinformation that will disrupt the flow of their entire life and also affect everyone who cares about them and loves them. So bravo, Brette.
Well, and part of the goal here, when you're doing that therapeutic intervention, you're working with the individual and often the family as well. What can we do to help you thrive?
Yes, right.
That is a message that resonates with families.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every parent wants to see their child thrive.
Yes.
Most parents don't want to think of their child as a violent threat.
Right.
But they do absolutely want to see their child thrive.
Yeah.
And so the more we can focus on those early interventions and supporting the whole child, the more effective we are at getting that outreach from the people who need it most.
Yeah. Well, Brette, it's wonderful to talk to you, and I've learned so much from you, and I'm just thrilled to learn more about your network and how you operate and the directory, and just the way you have structured your approach. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you'd like to make sure that we talk about before we end?
No, I think you covered all of it. So I will just reiterate, everyone has a role to play in prevention. If you're looking for resources, go to screenhate.org for resources specifically tailored to parents and concerned adults. And we at the Prevention Practitioners Network are happy to help.
Excellent. Well, Brette, thank you so much for, first and foremost, for all the work that you do. It's wonderful that you're there. And it's reassuring to know that you're there. And secondly, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us on the morning show today. I really appreciate it. And I just applaud your efforts. It's wonderful that you're there. And part of what's reassuring is how well your program is designed, but also, as you describe it, how many practitioners and how many organizations are part of your network now. And I assume it's growing.
Yes.
You know, because the need only appears, to become more intense and more widespread. But hopefully that means that you also have more resources yourself to add to the network as more people at every level are mobilized then to begin saying, you know what, we have to do something about this. And oh my gosh, thank goodness the network is there, because that's a good place for us to start.
Resources are always a challenge, but I share your hope that there will be more resources as well. The need is there, and I have been overwhelmed by the response from practitioners. I initially thought at this stage in development we would have roughly 150 practitioners, and instead we have 1,200.
Wow.
It just shows the demand signal that they're receiving from their clients.
Yeah.
To learn more and connect more on this issue, because unfortunately hate has really become mainstream.
Sadly, it really has. And as it's become mainstream, we're also at a time in our American culture when guns steadily become easier to access for just about everybody. So it's really wonderful you're there. Thank you so much, Brette. I've really enjoyed talking to you. I've learned a lot, and thank you for the work you do.
Thank you, Mary.
Well, that's it for today, everybody. Please join us again next Thursday at 9 for the morning show. Till then, be well, everybody.